he, he wasn't in school yet, so this is almost no different for him, with the exception of Jennifer's home all the time now. But Autumn did a drive by with her grandmother the other day and was just like, I want to get out the car. Why can't I go back to school? Right? Like there's not a full, and she's 5, right? So there's not a full comprehension of exactly what this moment is.
So Harry seemed to mention we might be live on the chat here, but that might just be the chat function that's live.
Someone also just texted me and said that she's listening to me on the radio. So we're definitely live.
So we're on the radio. So Harry Droz, should we officially start the show? Thing is, I think that the Trump administration has taken Harry Droz hostage and he's not able to communicate with us. He's the station manager at WNHH. We've been waiting to go on the radio with the show because the internet went down at our hardworking station manager's house. And right now a listener has told us we are live on the radio. So I'll tell you what, you guys want to formally start the show now?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Now, do you know if your person was hearing it on FM or was your person hearing it on the live stream or on Facebook?
FM.
Okay, so why don't we start the show? But although we do want it to be on Facebook as well, maybe if we can send a message by carrier pigeon to Harry Droz, our station manager, who's being kept at an undisclosed location by a brigade from the Trump administration who we thought were his friends, but they're really out of incommunicados. So we don't know what platforms we're on right now and what platforms we're not at WNHH FM's Dateline, New Haven. Well, if you're listening on the radio, let me tune you in. Because of COVID-19, we're doing our shows remotely. And this morning, our station manager, just as we were about to go live at 11 a.m., lost his internet at his house, his connection. So we weren't able to go on all our platforms. But now we're told that for some reason we're on FM, even though we're not on Facebook yet. And
yes, we are. I see us on Facebook.
I see us on Facebook.
All right. So I'm Paul Bass. I'm the host of Dateline New Haven, WNHH FM. And welcome. We invite you to look behind the headlines and the stories that make New Haven tick. And what a day in history this is, folks. Even though we're 28 minutes late, we're not too late to talk about it. 50 years ago today, the New Haven was looking like it looks right now, which is that stores were shuttered. People walking down with masks, those different kind of masks, and people had a sense that doom and destruction were looming. It was a very different reason. It was May Day 1970, and there was a nationwide rally call to people to come to New Haven to protest the prosecution of 2 leaders of the Black Panther Party. They were on trial in New Haven for a murder they did not commit of a party member named Alex Rackley. It happened in New Haven. They thought he was an informer. He was just about the only person here who was not an informer, as it turned out. And he was tortured and killed. The people who committed the murder had already either confessed or been arrested and tried. But as part of a national program called COINTELPRO, in which the FBI was seeking through extralegal means to get rid of the leadership of organizations, they're putting Bobby Seale, the national chairman, and Erica Huggins, one of the leaders who was based here, on trial for conspiracy and seeking the death penalty. Radicals came from all over the country, mostly white radicals, saying we're going to burn down New Haven, burn down Yale. Yale made a move of opening its gates, canceling classes, inviting everyone to hang out there and get granola because they worried otherwise people would be frustrated they couldn't get inside. And a big rally was planned. The National Guard was called. They had orders that if they shoot dead anyone, they would not get in trouble. And then 4 days later, that happened at Kent State. 2 days later, at Jackson State. And a big rally was planned. And now 50 years later, with COVID-19, again, we've shuttered. People are sheltering at home. They're all worried. My guests today both know a lot about that time, but more importantly to me, they know a lot about today, how the legacy of those days informs what kind of work gets done now for social justice. Welcome, Mercy Quay of the Narrative Project, Hearst columnist, New Haven native. Thanks, Mercy, for coming on Dateline New Haven. And Baz Rosado, editor of the Inner City News, host of Love Babs Love Talk, and also a New Haven native. Thanks, both of you, for coming on. So what do you both, Mercy's been immersed in putting together a podcast for ArtSpace that's going to come out soon about the trial then. And Mercy's very involved in social justice actions right now in Connecticut. Mercy, what do you think about it? What does that event look like to you that happened before you were born? How does it affect your life now?
Yeah. So for to detail how far before I was born, we're talking 20 years before I was born. And and that number, that amount of distance is really important because the legacy resonates today. It resonates for me. I mean, you can see sort of the Free Huey button here. The Black Panther
Yeah.
Party resonates for me today. But specifically here in New Haven, we can see how that legacy has sort of taken root, and activists throughout New Haven today are sort of picking up that same mantle, right? And so for the podcast that you mentioned that I'm co-producing with Art Space, you can see is called Revolution on Trial. And we've called it that because it is intended to be an inside look of who and what was actually on trial at that time, right? In speaking to you, Paul, I interviewed you for the podcast as well, in your role as the author of, Murder in Model City, the book on the trial here in New Haven. And the other folks that I've spoken to, we've spoken to Erica Huggins, we've spoken to Elise Brown. Erica Huggins stood trial during that time. Elise Brown, who was a member of the party at the time and a member of the Hill Parents Association. But we've also, more importantly, as importantly, have spoken to activists here in New Haven today who have, again, picked up that mantle of organizing Black liberation movements. So that's, Carrie Ellington, Addis Castillo, Alo Marchu, and a number of folks who have been a part of Black liberation movements here. For me, what that legacy shows is when everything is at risk, how much of yourself will you give to the movement to ensure that progress, continues, even if that's in your absence. And that is the legacy that we've gotten from the Black Panthers, but specifically the New Haven Black Panther Party.
And before I go to Babs, because I'm very interested in that, one thing that struck me about that period is that a little bit different, I think, from today, and especially until a couple of years ago, was that people then genuinely believed a revolution was possible in the country, not reform, not passing a bill to increase food stamps by $1 a week. It was, there were Black liberation movements around the world against colonial powers, over 50 of them in just a decade or two. They felt it was happening here. And the Black Panther Party thought it was a legacy. They were stockpiling weapons, although they didn't advocate violence first or anything. And they were ready for war, and they were ready to win. And if you lived back then, not just on racial protests, but against the war, other civil rights issues, you really believed, a lot of people really believed, because you just said, Mercy, how much you're willing to give yourself when the moment arrives. And there's always that question, when is that moment? Because every day somebody decides this is the moment, right? Survivalists believe this is the moment. People believe in UFOs, but also people like back then who are grounded also often believe this is the most important thing right now, because you see someone being mistreated, you see horrors going on in the prisons, you see economic inequality growing. When you look back at that moment, why do you think that was a moment that people believe that? And how do you know now when it's a moment where you're posed with that question, how much do I give?
Yeah, I think that the moment that the New Haven Black Panther Party was able to tap into at that time was this unique combination of anger and upset, right? But also the numbers and solidarity of people who are willing to join the movement, right? And you see sort of the catalyst of that at certain parts in Black liberation movements. I think that during the 60s, you saw numbers swelling of people saying, all right, now I'm ready to give, what is required of me. And I think that, as a people, with a shared experience of oppression, whatever people were talking about. In this particular case, we're talking about sort of Black liberation movements, but people in general, right? When you have to get to a point of complete despotism, you have to be desperate enough to be able to seek out change. And you have to see that there are other people at their wits' ends that are ready to join the movement along with you. I think that the catalyst that we saw here in New Haven at that time was Yale students were able to join the movement. The Hill Parents Association were fed up, right? And the Black Panther Party here in New Haven that was young and had just gotten started, was like, all right, well, now that we see that there's a catalyst, there's a solidarity, there's a critical mass of people ready and motivated to action. This is the time to do an action. This is the time to act here in New Haven. And I think that, I mean, you can talk a little bit more about sort of the Warren Kimbrough catalyst, but I think that that actually ended up being a moment that called to attention the cauldron that we are sitting in here in New Haven, and actually got people to their wits end to act.
All right. Well, Mercy Quay and Babs Rawls-Ivy are joining me on Dateline New Haven today to talk about May Day and the Black Panther trials 50 years later. What happened then and what's happening now with that in mind? Babs Rawls-Ivy, you were 7, right?
I was 7.
So your birthday actually is May 2nd. It was supposed to be a 3-day rally. It was 2. Because, it's funny, if the whole rally happened, it ended up being a boring rally. Only 15,000 people started the first day, not many the second. All these crazy yippies came, like Jerry Rubin. They were really boring. I mean, there were some cool people like Kenneth Mills who had a lot to say. But in general, it was mostly white people kind of getting stoned and taking their shirts off. And what really was supposed to happen, people I interviewed think, was the Nixon administration wanted the bloodbath here. And through this, my theory in a book, and I don't have to go into much today, so I think there was a conspiracy, but the one no one knew about was between people who didn't work together usually. Black Panthers, Yale officials, even New Haven police, who all like trying to hurt each other during the day, and Black students at Yale whose own role is not recognized enough in here. They were meeting secretly to make sure there was no violence. Bobby Seale recorded a tape that they played on the streets in a car saying now is not the smart time to take up arms. But the Nixon administration, the view especially of Yale officials who saw John Dean, the attorney general, sneaking into town quietly, bombings that went off at Ingalls Rink and the New Politics Corner that we think was probably planted by the right, and the National Guard getting the order, they're not getting in trouble, they shoot. They think that they wanted the bloodbath here, and because we stopped it, that's why at Jackson State University on May 2nd, 2 people were killed. You never hear about that one because it was African-American people who were killed. And then Kent State on May 4th, the day no one forgets in the American popular imagination, when the tragic shooting of 4 unarmed protesters who happened to be white. Babs, you were 7. What do you remember?
I knew I had adults around me who were members of the Black Panther Party, who were very much a part of that thinking. I think what I remember most as I look back in hindsight, I remember the posters being plastered all over town, the pig pictures and Black liberation pictures and posters and all that other kind of stuff. I remember that. I remember the Black Panthers being in the community on Dixwell Avenue feeding us, right? We'd go in the mornings and have breakfast, that kind of thing. I remember groceries and all of that kind of stuff by the Black Panther Party. I think what is most telling, what I take from all of this is that, throughout the history of this country, Black people have been nothing but peaceful people. I mean, there are many times when we absolutely could have overthrown and got out there and really done some damage beyond Watts and all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting to me that as a group of people that are always trying to be on the side of peace, violence is always the first method used against us. It's always the first method with police brutality. So, the 1960s coming off the heels of Jim Crow and all that other kind of stuff, people were fed up. I think we are starting to sort of, I thought we were at the tipping point with the killing of kids in the streets, Black kids in the streets, and the formation of Black Lives Matter and all of that. I thought we were at the tipping point then, and everybody was sitting on the edge of their seats like, oh, this is going to, turn out badly. But how we like to do, we like to pull out the magical Negro, Martin Luther King Jr. Let's be peaceful and let's, and they've whitewashed Dr. Martin Luther King to the point where they want you to believe that he wasn't about that. And he was very close to that. He was very close to like, maybe this civil disobedience was not the way to go. Maybe we should, because my people are getting killed in these streets and nobody is saying anything. So I think we're sitting in this place yet again of loss of jobs, people feeling very desperate, housing situations, education inequities. I mean, we are back in this place yet again, 50 years later. And there's not much change that we can wrap our arms around to make people say it's not the time. I don't know what the time is, but I think that's a argument that people can't make anymore. Like, it's not the time. I think people are going to take to the streets.
Can there be an organized revolution? Like, one argument I've heard from Black left people about the Panthers who agreed with their positions was that, separate from right and wrong, they weren't going to win the shootout. No matter how many guns they stockpiled, there was not mass American support. Some people saw, like, the Great Society programs as a sedative to people who otherwise would take action. That in America, unlike in colonial countries elsewhere, there was not going to be a physical confrontation that was going to be won. I don't know that I see in America right now organizing for a war, like a revolution in the street.
I think white people are doing that. I mean, white folks are doing it with their flags and their. I mean,
that's where I'm seeing it in Michigan right now, in Wisconsin.
These white men walk to the Capitol in Michigan with guns, and not one of them got shot. Not one of them got dragged to the ground. There was no dogs. There was no hoses, and they proudly walked because it was their God-given right to go with bearing arms to the Capitol. And we're sitting here like, oh, you could really do that?
You know,
right, with emphasis on you, right? Like, not, oh, we can really do that. I think, and it's not even a contemporary thing. I think white folks have been doing that for a long while. If you think even back to Cliven Bundy, right? Like, deciding that he was going to take government land. And I think that, you know, nothing in our American history has said that Black people are violent people, that Black people are a take up arms and pursue and murder and rape and pillage. Nothing in our history says that. So there's no reason to fear Black people in the way that American society has pumped into us, has threaded into us. But there is a reason, because history shows year after year, decade after decade, century after century after century, that there is reason to fear what white folks with guns will do.
And that, let's go with that point. So in May Day 1970, the only violence that did happen, and through a stroke of luck, no one was hurt, was largely believed to be white right-wing violence. The bomb that went off at Ingalls Rink during a dance, there were 2 stages set up. It went under the stage where the opposite end of people were, and the New Politics Corner. I'm really interested in the point you guys brought up with right now, 50 years later. I asked whether there is that environment now, the idea that people think there could be an armed revolution. And Babs, you're right on point. We just saw this week armed people at the state capitals, right-wingers, white, against bringing guns, because it was the Panthers who brought guns to the state capitol nonviolently in California, which was at the beginning of their existence in the late 60s, when you were allowed to do that legally in California. And Ronald Reagan was so freaked out at the sight of Black Panthers with guns visibly showing the Capitol, they actually passed gun control supported by Ronald Reagan. So right now, do you think we're at a moment now where in the 1970 May Day, people on the left thought a revolution was possible, that they could participate in your mouth, that 50 years later, it's the kind of right white, because, you know, in Idaho, they're talking about actually secession. They're arming there with elected officials supporting them, saying to have a separate country there by arms. Do you think that we've gone to a place 50 years later where it's the white right now that is holding, in one perverse way, the Panther legacy of taking up arms against their government?
Oh no, I wouldn't put that. I would not say Panther legacy, because white folks have been taking up arms since the very beginning.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Ask the indigenous people whose land that we sit on. You know, so I'm not going to put them in the same. I'm not going to put white folks like that in the same sentence. I think white folks got to come to reckon with that they are the ones that they need to legislate themselves over.
That part. Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that they need to have the legislation for the guns, because they're the ones that are stockpiling guns. I don't know any Black people, and I was a gun owner. I mean, I was a gun owner in the whole nine, and had and carried a permit. So
that's a lot different from stockpiling arsenals.
But that's
right.
What I mean.
Very different.
Listen, if there's 1 or 2 Black people stockpiling arsenal, that's one thing. but I guarantee you there's thousands and thousands of white folks.
Oh, it's an organized movement.
Who are
it's an organized movement. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And I think that what we're finding out in these last few weeks is that these protests that are organized at state capitals across the country have been positioned to appear as though they're organic, but the reality is they're not. They're strategically organized, right? Facebook has even in recent weeks decided to take down the events that are organizing folks to flood onto the state capitals where they are. And I think that, you know, the points that you've made, Babs, is well taken. I think that one of the pieces that I say to sort of extrapolate on your point a bit is racism isn't a problem that Black folks need to fix, right? Racism is not a problem that brown folks need to fix, or anyone who's not white. Racism is a white person's problem, right? It is fostered and situated comfortably within the realm of white privilege, right? And when you arm white privilege with an arsenal, that is a very, very dangerous scenario, not just for our democracy, as we like to call it, but also for the people who are being and have been oppressed in our country since its inception, right? We know what the reports from Katrina have been, from Louisiana during Katrina, and how Black people were literally being assaulted by white folks who with their arsenals, right? And the firsthand accounts of people who were being chased down by white folks in pickup trucks with Confederate flags. Because in the fall of society, right, when the structures around us start to crumble, right, the only people who have something to lose are the Black and brown folks who have been kept away from their, First and Second Amendments, and who aren't stockpiling guns in the way that right-winged white folks have been doing for decades. And so I think you're also right when it comes down to talking about the Black Panther Party, the legacy that they have created and that we still see today is in protecting Black liberation by leveraging our inalienable rights that have been endowed upon us by the Creator and the Constitution. If we're saying that people can take up arms, right, that you have a right as an American citizen to take up arms, the Panther said, okay, I'm an American citizen, and if taking up arms is the only route and the only path towards my liberation, towards protecting my liberation and the liberation of the folks that I love, then that's what I have to do, right?
So why are we not seeing it now? So is Babs and Mercy Quay, Babs Osavi, Mercy Quay, and Dateline New Haven, WNHHFM, we're talking about May Day, 50 years later. So as you point out, then as now, white groups armed themselves and committed violence. In 1970, the Black Panthers were arguing that in self-defense, Black liberation groups need arsenals as well. Am I wrong in observing that 50 years later, we're not seeing on any kind of meaningful scale that same argument? All the violent, even though it was always a non-violent movement, in my opinion, in terms of where they wanted to lead, I'm not aware, maybe it's out of it, I'm not aware of Black liberation groups of any following in this country or in New Haven stockpiling weapons. They were stockpiling weapons on Orchard Street.
Mm-hmm.
Have people decided in 2020 that there are other strategies we're going to use instead? Because I agree with you, Mercy, about there are people today picking up the mantle, same philosophy, same issues, and we'll get to those issues, but I'm not hearing armed self-defense.
Yeah.
Is that a change, or am I missing something?
No, I don't think you missed anything. I think we decided a long time ago that number one, the master's tools will not take down the master's house. That's number one. Number two, we have decided as people that we are going to sort of fight this fight in other ways. We are going to go to school. We're going to go to historically Black colleges. We're going to buy property. We're going to get an education. We're going to assimilate, so that, this whole notion of assimilation, and not draw attention to ourselves. I mean, every other group has done it. It seems to be harder for us to do it because of the virtue of the color of our skin, and our skin is weaponized, as you well know. So I think we have decided that guns was not going to be the tool in which we would have revolution and change, that we believed that if we could level out the playing field, get into places where decisions are made, that somehow or other that would be the revolution that would save all of us, right? But that hasn't happened. So now people have to start to think about, and maybe this is decades away. Listen, don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for bloodshed or revolution in these streets like that, because our people will take the greater hit, right? Black people will take the greater hit, and I don't want to see that. But I will say though that as long as we are trying to exhaust peaceful means of liberation and moving the community and the race forward, we're going to do that first. We're always going to do that first because we're peaceful people.
Yeah, and to build on that, I think that, you know, the reason why we're not seeing that as much right now is for the reasons that Bab has articulated. But I'd also say that it's a matter of strategy on you know, the side of Black liberation movements, and also the strategy on the side of white liberals. I think that if we weren't to talk about messaging strategies that have worked over the last, you know, 50 or 60 decades, then we would be doing a disservice in talking about what the shift has been, right? When Martin Luther King was around, he was a threat to the state, right? But after assassination, he became, right, like he became the pillar of, right, that exceptional Negro. Why don't you assimilate and be X, Y, and Z? So the language around all the quotes that we hear from Martin Luther King, from major corporations, from politicians, from the government itself, are the quotes that have been bastardized in themselves and used against Black folks to discourage violence and to discourage dissent in a lot of ways, right? The "why can't we be friends" type of thing, right? As opposed to the more militant language that we know Dr. King also ascribed to, and the language around justice, where he was not wavering. He was completely relentless and completely unwavering when it came to, right, the issues that we're facing are issues of class, are the issues of poverty, and are the issues of complete and extreme despotism from the state, right? So when we the strategy taken up by white liberals and politicians and sort of just the mainstream and the dominant culture that bastardized that language and really quelled movements that were radical, right? What we get now is a splintering, because Black people aren't a monolith, let's start there, is a splintering of ideas. You have your Black folks who are stockpiling. I would be remiss to say that, to not say that, right? In the South, less so in the North, I would say, but definitely in the South, you have Black folks who are stockpiling in guns, who are practicing their Second Amendment rights, just as much as the white right wing, that is such a hard phrase for me to say every single time, folks, and just as much as Clive and Bundy. But you also have folks who are taking the route that you've articulated, Babs, who are, right, like, let me go and get this PhD and let me come back to my communities and do the amount of work that I know needs to happen here, right? I mean, in 2016, Black women were named the highest educated group by demographic in our nation, right? And so some of us, because again, we're not a monolith, we've splintered out. Some of us are taking routes of militants, and some of us are taking routes of you know, a quote unquote excellence through education, that kind of thing. And some of us are taking the routes of organizing within systems, right? Being public servants, working within school districts, working within municipalities, and trying to do that groundwork. And I think so. The strategy, the issue that I think we walk in today, where the movement feels a little weakened, is mostly because we're not a monolith, right? And the spread of ideas is vast among Black people, but also just among people in general. We have such a diversity of ideas in our country today, and I think we would be remiss to talk about Black liberation movements in any other way.
Well, believe it or not, our time's running out because we did miss the first half because of an attack by conspiracy.
We didn't get to play the trailer
on our station manager, Harry Jarrell. We're going to play trailer often in the next few days.
Okay, great.
But you know, the issues that the Panthers raised then when we had May Day in 1970 school breakfast, police misconduct, hunger, protest and race relations, sickle cell anemia, the effect of drugs on the Black community, role of women in political organizations, and slumlords. Any of those sound familiar today? Mercy,
1970 is still looking like 2020.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It was like 1970.
And Mercy, what did Erica Huggins say about May Day and when she looks at it 50 years later?
You know, Erica Huggins is probably the most Zen person I've ever had the pleasure of interviewing. She physically makes you slow down and consider things. Some of the most insightful things that she said, you know, she was a kid when this whole thing was happening, right? And she was saying how she was in her early 20s. She she was 19 years old when she came to New Haven to be a part of the founding of the Black Panther Party. And she was just saying, we were kids. We were kids at the time. This entire movement, she was like, it's important to know that an entire movement where the government itself turned on Black folks was sprouted by kids. They were afraid of kids and what kids could be doing, and young adults. And she carries pieces of the trial with her every day, she says. And I asked her a question. She sort of put me in my place here with this question. I asked her, I said, what for you was the most, I named a specific moment in the trial, and I said, a lot of people will say that was a pivotal moment for you in this trial, when you turned to the prosecutor who was badgering you about, well, you were there, why you had decisions that you could have made, why didn't you make decisions in that moment in the middle of the torture, and badgering her, not letting her get a word in edgewise. And she turns and she said, well, you know what? That's because people don't often let women have an opportunity to speak. That's more of a paraphrase than the quote, but I asked her, I said, a lot of people will say that is a pivotal moment in this trial. What would you say to that? How was that a pivotal moment for you? And she was saying, well, Mercy, something that you need to understand is, in my early 20s, when my husband died, recently, right before the trial, right before me getting arrested, and my kid was taken away, and I'm being put on trial for this case that took up the national eye, every moment was a pivotal moment for me. I was a kid in the middle of a liberation movement that I didn't know I was starting. And I think that speaks to some of the activists who are doing work today and here in New Haven. Some of it's strategy, right? Some of it is a strategic move. And some of it is sort of, you happen upon a movement that you are lucky to be a part of at the exact right moment where you felt ready enough to give all of yourself towards that movement.
Wow. And I feel lucky to have been part of this conversation. We just got started, but thanks to the internet demons, we only got to do half our show today. We got to close off now. Well, that's the beginning of a conversation that Mercy, Quay, and Babs Rose-Ivy are going to continue it, as well they should, about the legacy of the Panthers. Today's the 50th anniversary of the protest, but not of the trial. And in coming weeks, Mercy Quay from the Narrative Project and Hearst newspapers is going to be doing a lot of discussion and interviews about this. And Babs Rose-Ivy,
I'm talking to Ms. Huggins too.
You're talking to Ms. Huggins, and every day on Love Babs Love Talk at 9 a.m., I would argue, I really would, that these important issues and what the legacy is talked about at this level. You're going to find 9 a.m. from Babs Rose-Ivy. So thanks for giving me a taste of that, folks. Mercy Quay, Babs Rose-Ivy, and thanks to Harry Droz for dealing with the online demons.
Would I be able to just also give credit to Art Space for the exhibition that they're putting on, which is what the podcast is being produced through. The exhibition is called The Revolution on Trial. So I just want to be able to plug that as well.
All right. So thanks for joining us today on Dateline New Haven. I think we're not going to have outro music. Happy birthday, Babs. Sorry about that, guys.
That is intense. Paul, you still there?